Okay, we're going to do another project that connects printmaking and watercolor, but I wanted to show you the watercolor that we demonstrated the other day. I trimmed, remember, the spritzing with the water on the paper created a stain in the upper left-hand corner in the margin. So what I've done is I've trimmed it off, carefully marking the edges, the corners of the print, and then when tearing, you tear on the back side. So you lay your straight edge here and tear. And printmaking has its own little strange rules and with regards to presentation, and you never cut with scissors. If you're going to create a bleed print, you always tear to mimic the edge that comes with natural handmade paper, which is typically used in printmaking. And so it simulates that edge. And the reason for cutting and tearing on the back side, so it'd be face down with your straight edge and pulling back, is because of using the straight edge, you're going to get this ridge here. And it's better to have it on the back side than on the front of the image. So always remember, tear on the back to create your bleed print, and then you still have room to sign, and it's also allowable for these kinds of prints to print inside the margin. And of course, I've seen bleed prints signed at the bottom, and I've also seen them signed at the top. And the typical way of signing would be your name goes on the left side, or the right side here. The title of the work goes on the left, or untitled. You don't have to title it. And the numeration for a monotype print is 1/1. So 1/1 would go in the middle. Okay. Now, if you're not going to have a signature, or excuse me, a title, then you can put your 1/1 here, and your signature remains on the right side. Okay, so that's the standard appearance or a method of notation for prints. Okay, so I just wanted to show you that. Now, what we're doing next is referred to as a monotype transfer drawing. Okay, so what I've done here, I think in the last video I mentioned that we were going to need to use oil paint for one of the stages. So let me walk you through what I've got at this point. I used a bigger plate. And I taped it off. So the reason for using the bigger plate was I wanted to simplify my registration. So I cut a sheet of paper down to fit the size of the plate. It's exactly the same size as the plate. Okay. And I wanted the print to be smaller, so I used double tape, the top, bottom, and the sides to make the composition smaller. Okay, so that I would have boundaries around my print. And what I did is on the paper, I held this up to the light after I taped it in. After I trimmed my paper down to the same size, I went ahead and held it up against the window, and I traced the boundaries of that window on my paper, because this is the space you're going to need to work in. And when I show you how we're doing this print, then you'll understand why I traced the window of the printed area onto the back of my paper. This is the back of the paper. Okay. All right, so what we're going to do here is, once you've prepped it with the tape and done all that initial steps of measuring your paper and trimming it down and then taping it off, now I want to create a surface area that will be ready to accept the paint. So I've got an oil paint, and I don't like to use black straight, so I've mixed a little bit of ochre with it. So now I've got kind of an umber color, and I'm just going to use a brush. If you have, I know you've taken printmaking before, if you have a brayer or a roller, you can also use that to distribute your paint onto the surface. And I'm just going to block in this whole negative taped off area, and I may need to mix a little more of my paint. You don't want this to be a real thick coat. You want this to be thin, because we are also going to need to let this dry before we do the watercolor portion. Okay, now I'm running a little low. I'm going to mix up a little more in my tray. Let's see. Use a little yellow ochre. I'm going to add, I grabbed the blue by accident, but that shouldn't matter. I'll just use that's completely sealed. Refined black. Alright. Now my oil paints are really old because I paint in acrylic. I don't use a whole lot of oil except unless it's to do things like this. So they're a little on the thick side, and I'm just going to use a little bit of vegetable oil, just a drop or two. Yeah, just the regular stuff you use in the kitchen as my vehicle to thin it down here to make it a little easier to spread. Now I don't want to saturate it, I'll just put a couple of drops just so that I can move it around with the brush. Add a few more. And because it'll also help keep the paint thin so that you're not inclined to make that process with thick paint, because we don't want to wait forever for it to dry, because we want to get on to the watercolor stage of this as soon as we can. So let me go ahead and take care of this real quick. Spread it around. So this is one of the easiest forms of printmaking. It doesn't require a press. It still falls under the category of a monotype because there is no carving or alteration of a surface of a plate of any kind. We're just using a smooth plastic plate. Don't worry about this being even, because the use of watercolor later on is going to give you a more painterly appearance. We don't want something in this first stage to be so mechanical, so that way the work will have a harmonious appearance that will strengthen the design quality of the work. All right, just about done. I have just enough paint here to finish this. Again, it may be hard to tell from the image on the screen, but this is quite thin. I can see through. I can see my strokes from the brush, and again, we're going to see strokes from watercolor brush later on, so let's don't get too picky about this. Okay, so now I'm going to set my oil away from my work area. Now, I'm ready to go to a more formal direction in the stage of this, so for that reason I'm going to need to peel off my tape here carefully, because it does have paint on it. So again, you want to keep your work surface clean as possible. Boy, getting this off your fingers is tape. It's supposed to be easy to pull off, but it certainly wants to stick on your fingers. And I'm just going to take a little bit of a paper towel here and just make sure. See, this is an old plate, so it's got a lot of stuff, a lot of stain dried into it, so I just want to double check. Okay, so for the sake of my image, I'm going to need to turn this in the vertical position. And now I want to take my print paper, and it's so easy to line this up because it's going to match the boundaries of my torn paper. And I'm just going to drop it in place. Okay. And for safety's sake, I don't want it to slide around, so I'm going to tape it in place. I can do it, I think I'm going to do it on the side, right here. And this tape is easy to pull up. You don't have to worry about tearing your paper. Okay, now you can see I do have a little bit of a sketch on the back. You can freehand it, or you can be a little more cautious, like I'm being here, and use a light sketch for reference. I'm also going to use one of my watercolor pencils just so that I can see if I've gone over one of my pencil lines. All right, so I'm going to use, oh gosh, this dark, I'm going to use a dark umber as well. Okay, so now when you take care of this stage, you have to be careful. Slide this, make sure it's in the frame of reference. You have to be careful that you can't rest your hand on the paper. Okay, so I'm going to come and start to look at this as a drawing, and I would advise you to consider altering the pressure wherever I'm pressing. I'm picking up ink from the plate, and the harder I press, the more I'll trace. But you can't rest your hand. Now, you could devise a bridge of some kind, but I'm not doing that for this demonstration. I hope my head isn't in the frame of reference here. Now I have only sketched a few lines, but now I can come back and I can start adding things that weren't originally there at the onset, more information, more detail. Now you know you can't control the pressure of what's happening on the other side. So just the weight of the paper might influence some of the marks that come through the other side. Just to give you an idea, I'm going to flip it over real quick so you can see how this is working. Of course, it may not be working. You see, there you go. Okay. All right. Come back. And I'm going to start to maybe engage a little more pressure. Now the weight of the paper I'm using is similar to that paper I used for the first print. It's a little on the thick side. The thinner the paper, the more absorbent and the more offset that you're going to get on the other side of the paper. So the image that you saw was a little on the faint side because of the thickness of the paper. If you're using something thinner, then by all means you're going to get more offset in the actual print itself. Let me thicken some of these stems to give me a little bit more of an opportunity to use a different color there. Also got my negative space here. I've got my water that's flowing down. No ear, belly button. Okay. Kneecap. Okay. Now one of the things that I can do, I can flip this over. You can see what I've got. It looks a little chaotic, but remember your color is going to come back in to help organize the information. And what I would like to do quickly, I'm going to find my brush. I'm going to come back in here. You can see what's left is a negative. And I'm going to hold my plate down and I'm going to fill in, see if I can get a little more paint. I'm going to move this around carefully because I don't have my I don't have my guide, my tape guide anymore. So I don't want to lose my nice clean edge here. And I think what I'm going to do is just squeeze out a little more black by itself. And just work this in. So what I want to do is strengthen some of the line work, not all of it, mostly in the figure. So I'm going to drop this back down and retrace over some of the lines. Okay, so I'm going to do that real quick. See, that's why you tape it down, is it makes this possible. You come back and come back in the figure. You see I have my figure becoming elaborated. I'm going to also maybe do a little bit more to the negative space here. Again, I certainly hope my head isn't in the way here. Okay, I'm content with it like that. The rest of the information will be supplied by the oil itself, the oil paint. I may want to also try and articulate a few of these feathers, not all of them. Okay. Okay. Leave it like, yeah, I can't resist. I'm gonna. All right, now what I'm going to do is let this dry. You're not going to need this plate. However, what I plan to do is I'm going to add the watercolor directly to the image. All right, now because this is oil and your watercolor is water-based, they're not going to mix. So the paint will be repelled from any area where there is the oil-based painting material. But I still want the format of the original composition, so what I'm planning to do is to tape the rectangle of the picture plane back on, and then that will allow me to maintain the shape of the original composition. Now, there's no need to clean this off. This is going to stay wet for a while. I don't want to disturb this. So I would suggest doing several of these. Again, you wouldn't even need to clean this off. What you can do is maybe mix a little more pigment, a little more oil paint, and directly over the top of this. Change the paper. Just make sure that if you're doing several and using the same plate, that you get all your papers ready so that you can take this one and apply the next one ready to go with the measurements and template already drawn on the back side. You can even do a more elaborate sketch than I did, but just make sure that you maybe consider using a different drawing pencil, just so that you remember what lines you've gone over. You can always flip it over and look at it this way, but just to make the going a little easier, that's what I recommend. So I'm going to let this dry, and the next demonstration, phase 2, probably need to give this a day. So come Tuesday, I will send the follow-up on this so that you can begin the completion of the print using the watercolor material. Okay? See you the next time. By the way, let me know, email if you have any questions about what you've seen, okay?